Menstruation is a regular cyclical schedule of endometrium line along with the blood and its products starting from puberty till menopause, excluding pregnancy. So this is regular schedule of the cyclical schedule. It starts from the puberty. It is a cycle. It's called menarche, and it will continue till menopause. That's when the menstruation stops. But during pregnancy, there is no menstruation. So, menstrual cycle. The mean duration of the menstrual cycle is 28 days, only 15% of the 28-day cycle. The normal range is from 21 days to 35 days. The minimum is 21 days, which would be cycle, and the longest cycle, the normal cycle, will last for 35 days. The average duration of menses, the bleeding days, is usually 3 to 8. So, there is a cycle reading of menstruation and about 3 to 8 days. The estimated blood loss is approximately 30 ml. So 30 ml is the approximate loss. If it exceeds 80 ml, then it is called hypothalamic. The ovulation occurs. The egg is released. Ovulation is the release of the egg from the ovary. It occurs usually on day 14. 36 hours after the onset of that cycle. So there is an surge which is followed by ovulation. The normal menstrual cycle, the phases of menstrual cycle and क्या अब Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, dear students. Hope you are all fine. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello. 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 So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today, our topic of discussion is physiology of the menstrual cycle. Now, what do you understand by menstruation? It is regular cyclical shedding of endometrial lining along with the blood, starting from puberty till menopause, excluding pregnancy. So, every month, on regular basis, there is shedding of the endometrium along with the passage of blood. It starts from the puberty. So it is the sign of puberty, which is called menarche. Onset of menstruation for the first time is called menarche. And it will continue regularly every month till menopause. And what is menopause? Menopause is a cessation of menstruation for a period of 1 year. It usually occurs after the age of 40 or 45. So this is what we understand by menstruation. But during pregnancy, there is no menstruation. The length of the menstrual cycle, the normal length of the menstrual cycle is usually 28 days. This is average. But the range is from 21 to 31 days. The shorter cycle may be of 21 days, and the longest normal cycle, it will be 35 days. The average duration of menses, the bleeding days, are usually 3 to 8 days. The normal estimated blood loss is usually 30 ml, and ovulation occurs usually on day 14. It is preceded by LH surge 36 hours before ovulation. The normal menstrual cycle, it is regulated by hormones released from hypothalamus, pituitary, and ovaries. So, the mean age of menarche and menopause are: menarche is usually around 12.7 years, and menopause is usually at 51.4 years. So what really happens during the menstrual cycle? There are four stages of your monthly cycle. Phase one is menstruation, as you can see over here. This is menstruation. In this, there is shedding of the thickened endometrial lining, and it will be shed, and new lining. The body will be prepared to produce new lining. In the phase two, it is the follicular phase, which is usually 16 days. Under the effect of hormones, prompt creation of follicles on the ovaries. Ovaries are producing follicles. Just one follicle will mature into an egg. And after follicular phase, there is ovulation. The mature egg is released from the follicle and is ready for fertilization. If fertilization occurs, then pregnancy takes place, or if it does not take place, then there is luteal phase. This is luteal phase. It is 14 days. The luteal phase is fixed. So, during luteal phase, the body will prepare to shed its second lining, and the cycle will begin again with menstruation. So after luteal phase, there is withdrawal of the hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and it will lead to the shedding of the endometrium, and the menstruation starts again. So this is the brief outline of the menstrual cycle. This picture shows a premenstrual period in which, under the effect of progesterone, that is the luteal phase, there is proliferative endometrium along with secretory changes. During menstruation, when there is withdrawal of the hormones, estrogen, progesterone, it will lead to the endometrial shedding, that is menstruation. So there will be shedding of the endometrium along with the blood. Then post-menstrual phase. After the shedding of the endometrium, the body will prepare under the effect of estrogen for next cycle, and there will be proliferation of the endometrium again. So there is shedding of endometrial layer during menstruation, and in the postmenstrual phase, that is the follicular phase, under the effect of estrogen, the body will prepare the endometrium. There will be proliferation of the endometrium. The cycle is strongly linked to the endocrine system. It is hormone-based and paracrine-based. So both hormones and paracrine glands take part in the regulation of the cycle. Typically, it takes 28 days to cycle through 4 phases. So there are 4 phases: follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase, and then menstruation. So during these phases, the hormones rise and fall. Now this picture shows the follicular phase. This is follicular phase, and this is the luteal phase. The follicular phase is under the control of estrogen and FSH, while the luteal phase is under the effect of progesterone. It starts after LH surge. In the follicular phase, increased level of the follicle stimulating hormone, it will cause maturation of the follicle, and it will act on the endometrium, will lead to proliferative changes, and there will be increased production of estrogen. This blue line shows estrogen. So there will be rise in the estrogen, and at the end of the follicular phase, there is LH surge, luteinizing hormone rises, and after LH surge, there is ovulation in the mid-cycle. as you can see over here, there is ovulation in the mid-cycle after LH surge. After ovulation, there is release of progesterone from the corpus luteum, from the ovaries, and this is luteal phase. And during this phase, there is an increase in the level of progesterone, and it will act on the endometrium and will cause secretory changes in the endometrium. So we will discuss in detail further. The follicular phase begins when estrogen levels are low. Anti-pituitary secretes FSH and LH stimulate the follicle to develop. The cells around the egg they enlarge, releasing estrogen. This causes the uterine lining to thicken. So, under the effect of estrogen, the uterine endometrium it will start proliferating. Ovulation occurs when there is a luteinizing hormone and FSH. They are still being released for another 3 to 4 days. There is a rise in the LH level. There is LH surge. It is called LH surge. After LH surge, what happens? The follicle ruptures. It releases ova into the fallopian tubes. So the femoral end of the fallopian tubes they capture the ova. During util phase, now the ovulation has taken place. The follicle is now empty. It changes to a yellow color, becomes corpus luteum. The graphene follicle after ovulation changes into corpus luteum. It continues to secrete estrogen but now begins to release progesterone. Now there is increased level of progesterone. So progesterone further develops uterine lining. It will cause secretory changes. If pregnancy occurs, the embryo will release hormones to preserve the corpus luteum. During menstrual phase, if there is no pregnancy, the corpus luteum begins to disintegrate. Progesterone level just start dropping, and the uterine lining detaches. Menstruation can begin. Tissue, blood, unfertilized egg, all they are discharged from the uterine cavity. It can take from 3 to 7 days, and sometimes may take 8 to 9 days. This beautiful picture of the ovary. This is ovary. This is the outer portion cortex, and this is medulla, and this is the hilum. Through the hilum, the vessels and nerves and lymphatics they enter and leave the ovary. So in the cortex, you can see primary follicle. Then it starts growing, and follicle. These antral spaces appear. This is antral follicle, and this is a mature follicle. It ruptures, and ovulation takes place. The remaining follicle, after ovulation, it becomes corpus luteum. Okay? So this corpus luteum starts secreting progesterone. If there is no pregnancy, what happens? It starts regressing, the level of the progesterone falls, and it will lead to onset of menstruation. Again, this picture explains the different phases of menstrual cycle. This is ovary, changes in the ovary, and this is uterus, changes in the uterine endometrium. In the ovary, there is a follicular phase, then there is LH surge and ovulation, and then there is luteal phase. While in the uterus, side by side, there are 4 phases: menstrual phase, proliferative phase, and ovulation in the mid-cycle. Then there is secretory phase and premenstrual phase. So what happens in the ovary? This primary oocyte or primary follicle develops and matures into a graphene follicle, which ruptures, releases the egg, and this follicle empty follicle becomes the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum secretes progesterone. If there is no pregnancy, it will undergo atresia and menstruation will start. Now, At the same time, in the uterus, the endometrium, there are three layers of the endometrium. This is myometrium, then this is endometrium. There are three layers of endometrium: the basal layer, stratum basalis, the metal layer, stratum functionalis or spongiosum, and stratum compactum is the uh, top innermost layer. So during menstrual phase, there is shedding of the endometrium, and after menstruation, the proliferative phase starts under the effect of this follicular ovarian phase. Here, estrogen is produced during this phase, and it acts on the endometrium and cause its proliferation. At the end of the proliferation phase, there is LH surge, which causes ovulation, rise in the luteinizing hormone, which is followed by ovulation. After ovulation, what happens? The corpus luteum starts secreting progesterone, and under the effect of progesterone, the secretory phase in the endometrium starts. During secretory phase, there are secretory changes in the endometrium. There will be no increase in the number of glands, but the glands will increase in size and they will become more tortuous. So after the secretory phase, when the corpus luteum starts regressing, there is withdrawal of the progesterone hormone, and it will lead to again onset of menstruation. So again, I will explain the physiology. Ovulation divides the menstrual cycle into two phases: follicular phase, which begins with menses on the day one of the menstrual cycle and ends with ovulation. Uh, in this phase, there is recruitment of the follicles under the effect of FSH, maturation of a cohort of ovate follicles, and only one follicle reaches the maturity. So this process, the maturation of follicle, is called follicular genesis. Under the effect of FSH, the primordial follicle, which is in which there is oocyte arrested in the diplotin stage of the first meiotic division, it is surrounded by a single layer of granulosa cells. It changes into a primary follicle, in which oocytes is surrounded by a single layer of granulosa cells with basement membrane and theca cells. So theca cells, they start appearing with basement membrane. It changes into a secondary follicle or pre-antral follicle. The oocyte surrounded by zona pellucida, several layers of granulosa and theca cells. Then there is tertiary follicle or antral follicle. This pre-antral follicle grows into antral follicle, which is secondary follicle accumulated fluid with the accumulated fluid, and there is the formation of a cavity which is called antrum. So that's why it is also called antral follicle. The oocyte is in eccentric position. It lies on at one side. It is surrounded by granulosa cells, and this eccentric position along with granulosa cells is called cumulus euphoros. So this picture depicts this is primordial follicle. Oocyte is surrounded by a single layer of granulosa cells. Pre-antral follicle, granulosa cells along with basement membrane. And this is egg, basement membrane, and these are theca cells. Again, this is antral follicle. The antrum appears and eccentric ovum, which is surrounded by uh, cumulus multiple layers of granulosa cells, which is called cumulus euphoros, and these are the theca cells. Then it grows into a mature gravidan follicle, in which this is the oocyte, this is zona pellucida, and these are the granulosa cells, multiple layers, which is called cumulus euphoros. This is the basement membrane, and these are the multiple layers of the theca cells, and this is the fluid-filled space, which is called antrum. So, what happens when this mature follicle, it ruptures. it ruptures and releases egg, and this egg is taken up by the femoral end of the fallopian tubes, and this empty graphilan follicle converts into corpus luteum, and it starts secreting progesterone. If there is no pregnancy, no fertilization, so it becomes uh, it regresses and becomes corpus albicans. After folliculogenesis, there is selection of the dominant follicle, which occurs on day 5 to 7. It depends on the intrinsic capacity of the follicle to synthesize estrogen. So high is the ratio of follicular fluid. As the follicle matures, increase estrogen, it leads to negative feedback effect on the pituitary and decreases the FSH level. At the same time, the follicle with the highest number of FSH receptors will continue to thrive. The other follicles that were recruited will become atretic. So only one follicle will survive and it will become a mature graphilan follicle and will lead to ovulation. The rest of the follicles, they will go etresium. Again, this is the ovarian cycle I have explained. So what happens in the pre-ovulatory phase, that is the follicular phase, the body temperature is 37. But after ovulation, there is rise in body temperature about 1 degree centigrade in the luteal phase. At the same time, what changes occurs in the hormones which are released from the pituitary, that is FSH and LH. The FSH is green line. It shows there is rise in FSH in the follicular phase, and in the follicular phase there is sharp rise in luteinizing hormone. It is called LH surge. And when there is LH surge, there will be ovulation. After LH surge, there is ovulation. And after ovulation, there is fall in both FSH and LH levels. Now, ovaries at the same time, they release estradiol or estrogen in the follicular phase, and the progesterone increases in the luteal phase. So, under the effect of these two hormones, the endometrium acts. Estrogen causes proliferative changes in the endometrium, and the progesterone causes secretory changes in the endometrium. So when there is withdrawal of these both hormones, estrogen and progesterone, there will be onset of menstruation. So this is a very explanatory picture which shows side by side all the changes which are taking place in the ovarian cycle, the body temperature, the hormones from the anterior pituitary and ovaries, and what are the changes which are occurring in the endometrial lining during these phases. The hypothalamus releases gonadotropin releasing hormone, which acts on the pituitary to release LH and FSH. The LH acts on the theca cells to secrete estrogen, and FSH acts on the granulosa cells. So it changes ATP to cyclic AMP, which acts on the aromatase, which changes androgens to estrogens. Estrogen acts on the target organs. At the same time, theca cells, they secrete androgens, and these androgens, they are converted by aromatase enzyme into the estrogen, and that estrogen acts on the target organs, which are the ovaries and endometrium and the breast. Other factors that play a role in folliculogenesis is inhibin. These are the local peptides, inhibin and activin. So there are two hormones, inhibin, local hormones, and activin, which further take part in this menstrual cycle. Inhibin is present in the follicular fluid. It has a negative feedback effect on the pituitary for FSH secretion. So it will decrease the FSH secretion. Locally enhances the luteinizing hormone-induced androstenedione production. While activin It is found in the follicular fluid also. It, as the name indicates, it stimulates FSH, induced estrogen production, and increases the gonadotrophin receptors and decreases the androgens. So, activin has opposite effect of inhibin. So, this is the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, which is necessary. This intact hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis is necessary for the menstrual cycle. If there is any problem in this axis, the menstruation will be ceased. So, hypothalamus releasing gonadotropin releasing hormone which act on the pituitary to release FSH and LH. FSH and LH will act on the ovaries, which are the gonads. They will secrete estrogen and progesterone, the steroids, and at the same time, these ovaries they have activin and inhibin in the follicular fluid. So these steroids they have both negative and positive effect on the anterior pituitary and negative effect on the hypothalamus. And activin, it will have positive feedback effect on the FSH, increase the FSH level, and inhibin will have negative feedback effect on FSH and it will decrease the FSH level. At the same time, in the ovary, the cholesterol is changed to pregnenolone, and which is converted into progesterone, and progesterone further is converted into androstenedione, and androstenedione is converted by aromatase enzyme into estradiol, and this estradiol will act on the target organ, that is the endometrium, uterus. So this is hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. This axis should be intact for a normal menstrual cycle. Now, after follicular genesis, there is pre-ovulatory period. The negative feedback effect on the pituitary, increase in estradiol and inhibin. It has negative feedback effect on pituitary and decreases the FSH level. Positive feedback effect on the pituitary is also present. Excessive estradiol, it causes positive feedback effect on the pituitary, facilitated by low levels of progesterone. So it will cause LH surge, and LH surge will cause ovulation, and later there will be secretion of progesterone. So this mechanism also operates after puberty. This positive feedback on pituitary causes increased FSH. Now, LH surge lasts for 48 hours. Ovulation occurs after 36 hours, accompanied by rapid fall in estradiol level, triggers the resumption of in the egg, affects the follicular wall, the follicle ruptures. Granulosa cells, they undergo luteinization and they start synthesizing progesterone. During ovulation, the dominant follicle protrudes from the ovarian cortex. It causes gentle release of the oocytes surrounded by the cumulus granulosa cells. What is the mechanism of follicular rupture? How the follicle ruptures? Number one, increased follicular pressure. Number two, there is enzymatic rupture of the follicular wall. There is increase in enzyme level which causes rupture in the follicular wall. Changes in the composition of the antral fluid, increased colloidal osmotic pressure, and this increased pressure will lead to the rupture of the follicle. While granulosa cells, they produce a plasminogen activator, and which increases the plasmin. Plasmin increases the fibrinolytic activity, which leads to the breakdown of follicular wall. So luteinizing hormone also increases the prostaglandin E, which increases the plasminogen activator, increase in the prostaglandin F2 alpha, and which causes increased lysosomal activity under the follicular wall. So all these factors they will lead to the rupture of the follicular wall, release of the egg, and the Graafican follicle uh, releases the egg, and the rest of the follicle becomes empty and is converted into corpus luteum. After ovulation starts the luteal phase. It lasts for 14 days. It is fixed. It is always 14 days. It is not more than 40 or less than 40. So it will continue to be 14 days, fixed 14 days of the luteal phase. During this period, there is corpus luteum. It secretes the progesterone. The vascular capillaries across the basement membrane uh, and grow into the granulosa cells, and they increase the availability of low density lipoprotein and cholesterol. So that's why the corpus luteum is yellow in color, because of the increased level of cholesterol. There is marked increase in the progesterone secretion. This progesterone causes suppression of the follicular maturation on the ipsilateral ovary, and thermogenic activity increases the basal body temperature by 1 degree centigrade, and it will also cause endometrial maturation, increase in the secretory changes of the endometrium. The progesterone peak 8 days after ovulation, that is day 22 of the menstrual cycle. Corpus luteum is sustained by luteinizing hormone. It loses its sensitivity to gonadotropins. Util uh, occurs, that it starts disintegrating. It causes decreased level of estrogen, progesterone, and withdrawal of these hormones will lead to the desquamation of the endometrium, and menstruation will start. The luteal phase. The estrogen and progesterone, they decrease, and they cause increased FSH and LH at the same time. So they have a net positive feedback effect. The new cycle starts with beginning of menstruation. If pregnancy occurs, HCG secretions uh, starts from the trophoblast and maintain the corpus luteum. Endometrial changes. What are the endometrial cycle? The changes in the endometrium during this menstrual cycle. As you already know, endometrium is the innermost layer of the uterus. What are the layers of the uterus? Endometrium, myometrium, then there is perimetrium, the outermost layer, which is covered with the peritoneum. This endometrium is further subdivided into 3 layers. It has 3 layers. The basal layer of the endometrium, which is adjacent to the myometrium, it is unresponsive to hormone stimulation. The hormones do not act on this layer. It remains same. So it remains intact throughout the menstrual cycle. It is not shed, and regeneration will start from this layer. Now the function layer of the endometrium, which is the it composed of 2 layers, zona compacta and spongiosa. So the middle layer is the zona spongiosa, and the innermost layer is zona compacta, which is the superficial layer. Now the endometrial cycle has proliferative phase, ovulation, and then secretory phase. The proliferative phase. During this phase, the estrogen is secreted from the ovary. It causes mitotic activity in the glands and stroma, increase endometrial thickness from 2 to 8 millimeters. So endometrial thickness will increase number of the glands and stroma. While in secretory phase, there is increased secretion of progesterone from the corpus luteum. The mitotic activity is severely restricted. There will be no increase in the number of glands. The endometrial glands will increase in size. They will become more tortuous, and they secrete glycogen-rich vacuoles. The stroma becomes edematous, and there is enlargement of the stromal cells. Also, the spiral arterioles develop, lengthen, and coil. So, this is the secretory changes which occur in the endometrium. Now, menstruation. The periodic desquamation of the endometrium, the external hallmark of the menstrual cycle. Just before menses, the endometrium is infiltrated with leukocytes. Leukocytes will invade. Prostaglandins, they will be maximum in the endometrium just before menses. Prostaglandins, they cause constriction of the spiral arterioles, which lead to ischemia and desquamation of the endometrium. It is followed by arterial relaxation, bleeding, and tissue breakdown. So the menstruation starts with a constriction and a relaxation, sequential constriction and relaxation of the spiral arterioles, which will lead to initial ischemia, desquamation, and then relaxation will lead to bleeding and tissue breakdown. The hypothalamic role in the menstrual cycle. As you already know, the hypothalamus releases gonadotropin releasing hormones, which are released in a pulsatile fashion. This activity is first evident at puberty. The follicular phase. During follicular phase, these hormones they are released in pulses, and these pulses occur hourly. And during Util phase, the GnRH pulses they occur every 90 minutes, after every 1.5 minutes. The loss of pulsatility uh, will lead to downregulation of pituitary receptors and decreased secretion of gonadotropins. This release of gonadotropin releasing hormone is modulated by negative feedback effect by steroids, that is estrogen, progesterone, and gonadotropins, that is FSH and LH. So this hypothalamic release of a hormone is modulated by the feedback effect, positive or negative, through the hormones released by pituitary and the ovaries. Now, what are the endometrial changes? The changes in the endometrium will be discussed in 5 phases. The menstrual endometrium, the proliferative phase, secretory phase, preparation for implantation, and finally the phase of endometrial breakdown. This is the endometrium. These are the endometrial glands. These are the veins, and these are the spiral. This is radial artery, which further breaks down into basal artery, and these are the spiral arterioles, which becomes more coiled and tortuous, and they form a plexus, capillary plexus around the glands. As you can see, this is the uterine artery, which subdivides into arcuate artery, and the arcuate artery leads to the radial artery, and radial artery further leads to basal artery, and then spiral artery. So this is the picture showing the structures in the endometrium. The endometrium grows from approximately 0.5 millimeters to 3.5 to 5 millimeters in height. The restoration of tissue constituents has been achieved by estrogen-induced new growth. The endometrium now demonstrates a combined reaction to estrogen and progesterone activity. Epithelial proliferation ceases 3 days before ovulation. The total endometrial height is fixed at roughly its pre-ovulatory extent, 5 to 6 millimeter, despite continued availability of estrogen. This limitation is due to progesterone interference with estrogen receptor expression. So, although there is estrogen present, but under the effect of progesterone, the further increase in the height of the endometrium is restricted by this progesterone with its effect, that is, it causes estrogen receptor expression. Interfere करता है उसके साथ. The tissue components continue to display growth. It leads to progressive tortuosity of glands. So what happened in the secretory phase? The glands become more tortuous, and the spiral arteries they become more intensified in coiling. The first histological sign that ovulation has occurred is the appearance of subnuclear intracytoplasmic glycogen vacuoles in the glandular epithelium on the day 17 and 18 of the cycle. These structural alterations are soon followed by active secretion of glycoproteins and peptides into the endometrial cavity, transmutation of plasma, immunoglobulins obtained from the circulation. So all these things This active secretion of glycoproteins, peptides in the endometrial cavity, transportation of the plasma, immunoglobulins from the circulation. The peak secretory level is reached 7 days after the mid-cycle LH surge. By day 13, after the ovulation, the endometrium has differentiated into three distinct zones: the stratum basalis, spongiosum, and compactum. 25% is basalis, straight vessels, spindle-shaped stroma. The middle zone is stratum spongiosum, which is approximately 50% of the total. Is the lace-like loose edematous stroma with tightly coiled spiral vessels and dilated glandular ribbons. The superficial layer of the endometrium is about 25% of the height. It is called stratum compactum, which has become large and polyhedral stromal cell, forming a compact structural sturdy layer. So we have three layers of endometrium: stratum basalis, 25%, stratum spongiosum, which is 50%, and stratum compactum, the most superficial layer, which is also about 25%. The stratum basalis is the layer of the endometrium which is not under the effect of the hormonal control. It is fixed, it remains there, it is not shed during menstruation. In the absence of fertilization, suppose there is no fertilization, pregnancy does not occur, and there is no implantation, and the consequent lack of HCG from the trophoblast, the fixed lifespan of the corpus luteum is completed, and estrogen and progesterone levels, they start waning off. So their level falls. The most prominent immediate effect of this hormone withdrawal is a modest shrinking of the tissue height and spiral arteriole vasomotor responses. So when the hormone falls, estrogen progesterone, it will lead to the onset of menstruation. So Whirling vascular sequence occurs. With shrinkage of the height, blood flow within the spiral vessels, it diminishes. Venous drainage is decreased and vasodilatation ensues. Thereafter, the spiral arterioles, they undergo rhythmic vasoconstriction and relaxation. With each successive spasm, it is, if it is more prolonged and profound, leading eventually to endometrial blanching. So it will lead to ischemia. Within the 24 hours immediately preceding menstruation, these reactions lead to endometrial ischemia and stasis. The endometrial tissue, it will break down. It involves a family of enzymes. So not only there is a vasospasm of the spiral arterioles, there are certain enzymes which are released, which lead to desquamation of the endometrium. The matrix metalloproteinases, these include collagenase, gelatinase, and stromylysins. So collagenase, it will degrade the basement membrane collagens. The gelatinase, it further degrades the collagens, while stromylysins, they degrade the fibronectin, laminin, and glycoprotein. So these enzymes also play a role in the desquamation of the endometrium. The progesterone withdrawal from the endometrial cells induces matrix metalloproteinase secretion. In a non-pregnant cycle, if there is no pregnancy, metalloproteinase expression is suppressed after menses by increasing estrogen levels. So estrogen level will rise and it will suppress the metalloproteinase, these enzymes. So the menstruation will stop. Thrombin generation in the basal endometrium in response to extravasation of the blood is essential for hemostasis. If there is bleeding, there should be another system to control the bleeding. So thrombin generation is the mechanism. It will control the bleeding. The basalis endometrium remains during menstruation, and repairs take place from these layers. Regeneration starts from this layer. This endometrium is protected from the lytic enzymes in the menstrual fluid by a mucinous layer of carbohydrate products that are discharged from the glandular and stromal cells. So why this basalis is not uh, um, undergoes disintegration? Because it is protected from the lytic enzymes in the menstrual fluid by a mucinous layer of carbohydrate products. So, mucinous layer is formed over it of carbohydrate products which that are discharged from the glandular stromal cells. So that is protective. It protects the stratum basalis. A natural cleavage point exists between basalis and spongiosum, and once breached, the loose vascular integrated stroma of the spongiosum disconnects, collapses. So the menstruation will start within 13 hours. The endometrial height shrinks from 4 millimeter to 5 millimeter. Menstrual flow stops as a result of the combined effects of prolonged vasoconstriction of the radial arteries and the spiral arteries in the basalis. Tissue collapse, vascular stasis, and estrogen-induced healing. So, the mechanism for stopping of the menstrual flow is the combined effect of prolonged vasoconstriction of the radial arteries and spiral arteries in the stratum basalis. The tissue collapses, there is a vascular stasis, and estrogen-induced healing starts proliferating the endometrium. Thank you. If you have any questions, you may ask. This is all about the physiology of menstrual cycle. Actually, it is controlled by the hormones which are released from the hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, and ovaries. And the hormones are released from the ovaries. They act on the endometrium, and they lead to changes in the changes in the phases of the menstrual cycle. So, besides these hormones, which are released, endocrine hormones, there are certain local peptides also, like activin and inhibin, which also play a role in the regulation of the hormonal control of the menstrual cycle. So, if you have any questions, you may ask.